I'd love to introduce our next speakers, and they will be talking about the role of storytelling in communication. So this is one of my favorite topics. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Jonathan, thank you for being here. Jonathan is passionate about writing, communications, and storytelling. He currently leads communications at BookBank Trust, a social impact firm working to restore some of Nairobi's most iconic public libraries. At BookBank, he has been a focal point for several campaigns, including BookBank's inaugural literary festival, which is #NBOLitFest. And prior to joining BookBank, he led communications at Pangea Accelerator, a Nordic-based startup accelerator and investment platform in East Africa, working to leverage opportunities for African entrepreneurs. And his communication efforts in Kenya for Kenya's startup tech space, commonly referred to as Silicon Savannah, contributed in advancing opportunities for entrepreneurs, leading to increased funding and stakeholder engagement. And so Jonathan will be joined by our very own Ian Anzabwa, who is the talent advocate here, lead here at PowerToFly. And just when he's not busy connecting people to opportunities, you've probably seen him before, maybe on LinkedIn or just with PowerToFly in general. He enjoys spending time reading novels, learning new languages, and road tripping. So I'm gonna pass the mic to both of you all. Thank you for being here today. And we appreciate your knowledge.
Great. Hello, everyone. Just a quick mic check that everyone can hear me. Jonathan, feel free to wave, of course, if that's the case. Oh, great. So yes, as I was saying, hello, everyone. Happy Black History Month. It's a pleasure to meet you all. For everyone that's been on board the Diversity Reboot series, I hope you're having a grand time. And for anyone that's just joined, welcome aboard. We'll be having a quick chat around the role of storytelling in communication. And to that end, we have Jonathan Bii aboard this chat as well. He happens to be the communication manager at BookBank. As has earlier been mentioned, BookBank is an organization that's dedicated to the building and restoration of libraries. So, Jonathan, how are you? And happy Black History Month.
I'm doing well. Happy Black History Month to you as well. So I think I'll start by saying I'm just so thrilled to participate and share with a platform with a brand that celebrates Black excellence, and supports like diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think it's just really exciting to be in that like intersectional space, and I mean, it's just very empowering to see like all this underrepresented like talent across like race, age, orientation, gender, and all the many like different forms of diversity, just all that happening. I think it's just absolute magic, man. I'm so happy to be here. How about you? How's life?
Life's great. I'm super happy to be here as well. And it's an honor to have you here on this chat. So I suppose hopping right into things, I'd love to know more about you and your career journey so far. Could you maybe let us know about who this person known as Jonathan Bii is?
Okay, so I'll try to be very short. I've already been accused of being too wordy before. My area of expertise, of course, is in communications. This would technically be my 4th year working within communications, and I've moved across different industries. So started within briefly in government, went to the private sector, and now working within the nonprofit sector. I think what's very interesting has been what we're currently doing, which is at BookBank Trust. And as mentioned, we're restoring some of Nairobi's like iconic public libraries, including the city's oldest library, which is the Macmillan. And I think why I found it very relevant to this panel is because storytelling is at the center of what we're doing. So in a lot of ways, to kind of like tell the story of an old building and how it's transformed and changed, and how the city has also been affected by this change, creates like a way to really talk about that work. And comms has really been at the center of kind of feeding into that work and helping us begin to reimagine libraries, not just as places for books, but also as places for art, for culture, for intellectual formation and conversation. And yeah, that's pretty much what I've been up to in a nutshell.
Oh, well, great. Thank you for that, Jonathan. And you actually segued into the subject quite well, because I do believe
Nice one.
libraries might be the embodiment of storytelling, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think just
So
looking at how, sorry.
I would say, of course, that largely that the world has changed vastly in the last couple of years, particularly in particular regard to this subject. And I'd say more so that storytelling has evolved over the course of history. Could you maybe tell us more on the role storytelling plays in both defining and communicating one's goals and ambitions, I suppose?
Okay, that's kind of loaded. But I think if you take a step back and we understand that human beings have always told stories since time immemorial. If you think of our experiences with Blackness, with queerness, and even just with like the history that we have of colonialism, for example, activism has been embodied in storytelling. We've always used it as a vital tool. To kind of like help us attain those freedoms. So if you think especially through literary works, if you think of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, James Baldwin, Malcolm X, I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And it's very interesting that public libraries tend to usually be the truest space for this kind of collections to sit where storytelling has been told, right? And it's also very true that when we think of libraries themselves, and I find that like very fascinating, is that they also embody that sense of freedom. You could walk in there, whichever person you are, is it like wealthy or not, Black, not, whichever race, whichever like level you are, and we get into this space and we're allowed to reimagine, we're allowed to think, we're allowed to express ourselves in such different and dynamic ways. And it's so fascinating that when we look at that, and I'll even draw an example of a conversation we were having last week as a team, and we were just talking like, would it be so much fun if we had Valentine's at the library, for example? I mean, I think you would sign up for something like that, yeah, right? But it's very interesting that, I mean, and it's very interesting that libraries add those things. So just tying back to what you're saying about storytelling and communication, I draw like such a reference from that because I realize a lot of organizations don't see the power that storytelling can have in kind of defining their brand and their product. So most times, they might do ads, some will work, some will not work, but they'll never, but the challenge has always been trying to help people understand that a story can be told and that story can be used to like create an immersive experience for your organization. And that like kind of moves your brand away from just kind of talking about this product, but also like helping people to find meaningful and powerful ways, to create like compelling stories for their brand. And I think there'll be more value for that as opposed to you trying to actively sell something to me, which is basically a marketing gimmick. Yeah.
Oh, great. Well, thank you for that, John. I really love the whole Valentine's in a library angle. Funny you happened to mention that on the eve. Well, it's not technically the eve, but Valentine's is right is very nearby, and well, don't blame me if I happen to hop in during of course such a thing. But you broached to one very powerful thought, and that's of course kind of pointing out storytelling as activism, and I think I can quite relate to that. I mean, relate and see it as well, because it's funny. It's always been staring me right in the face, and it's something I have never actually quite acknowledged, that storytelling is indeed activism, regardless of whatever form it might come in. Yeah. Another powerful thought you brought as well was with regards to the failures organizations kind of have at storytelling, at experience storytelling. I would say that it's certainly true that it's becoming increasingly more challenging to hold audience attention span across the globe, and a more personalized approach is vital as we approach the storytelling subject. So in light of that, what is the difference between storytelling as an art form and strategizing it creatively to navigate through the corporate space? And more so, how do you think we can find a clever balance? I feel that we have ourselves in a situation of kind of looking at storytelling as an art or as a product, a tool of commercialization. Any thoughts on that?
I mean, yeah, you just like boom, boom, boom with this loaded question. But yes, it's true. I think we see this a lot. There's a recent study that found our attention span has fallen from 12 seconds in the early 2000s to about 8 seconds today. That means you literally have 8 seconds to capture an audience and kind of like tell them and communicate your message as fast as you can. And you know, there's already like kind of systems overload. Social media, we're being bombarded with so much information. So that like kind of we've also become desensitized to, it has to be like super, if you're communicating, it has to be like, boom, you know, in your face, stuff that would be memorable. But I think the thing that I also always like to remind people is to look at creativity as the thing that feeds our identities as human beings. We're able to read, write, experience. A lot of that is fed through kind of like the stories that we tell. So there's stories that we can tell, and they need to be on that whole spectrum. Some need to be powerful, some need to be just for the sake of us telling a story. Some of them need to carry a message, and some of them just need to be stories about who we are, right? And so when you kind of sit and you're doing like your comm strategy, something that I've seen kind of happening, we also did it internally and I found it fascinating, was about building brand personas. And you try to kind of define your user. And through it, you're like, what are their likes? What are their motivations? What is the most likely place that you'd find them? What are the phrases that they're most likely to use, yeah? And the goal of that has always been to kind of humanize, and it's very important that I use that word, and find better way to communicate with them. And most times that's through stories. So it's a good thing to always like remind managers, business leaders, and like different people within the sector that in as much as we look at comms as still an art form, it's important that we remember at the bottom line of everything that we do is that we are seeking to create connections, and stories become the bridge for that. So if I'm able to communicate with you, Ian, and kind of capture your essence through a story that would kind of captivate you and move you, then that's the thing that would most likely want you to like buy into my message. And that should be like at the center of all that. So yeah, those are my thoughts on that.
I love that, Jonathan. Storytelling as an inspirational tool. Another interesting thought. That's thought number 3. It's quite heavy that you broach. I would say personally, as an avid consumer of storytelling via novels, TikTok, Instagram, anime, film, I've had the chance to be a recipient of what I would say are such tangible inspirational elements that keep me believing in the endless possibilities that exist out there. These things got me through high school. We all need this stuff through high school. I mean, and in real life now as well. The real life gig isn't any easier, I would say. I'm a dreamer. I'm a dreamer because of these inspirational elements that were kind of strung along by the storytelling agenda. Could you maybe tell us about some instances where storytelling has equipped you personally to inspire people and change their lives to inspire them?
I think it's right now, it's always super, super easy to just like be, this is what we've been doing at Book Bank. Because I feel like that is just stories like comms gold, right? A public library, and that's being rehabilitated and given this new like lease of life. But I think I'm going to segue a bit just for the sake of kind of the very corporate audience that's here as well, and go back to my experience while I was working as a comms lead at Pangea. So as mentioned, this was a business accelerator that was looking to support African entrepreneurs. So one of the programs we did was centered around affordable housing. And we're getting startups who are innovating within that sector to address the challenge of housing in Kenya. It's very interesting. Kenya, for example, every single year has a deficit of 200,000 houses, and in overall has a deficit of 2 million houses for us to reach our goal of affordable housing. And it cuts in many ways. Beyond just like talking of like a wall and 4 roofs, like a wall and 4 walls and a roof, sorry. We also have to think of like supply chain challenges, investor interest, and mostly like if you looked even in terms of media interest and stories that are coming out, there would be property listings, either this amount of money was kind of raised or used in real estate, and then that would be it. But there's a lot that is needed in the market, and it's a very clear need. So one of the things we did for a span of almost 2 years, we decided to address like what was happening within the industry. And for that, we hosted kind of curated events, constantly pitched to like media and kind of like promote these innovations. And I'm grateful that some of the startups did end up getting investment, but I'm going to single out one startup that has kind of like stayed with me going forward. This startup was called Jijenge Makers, and they were recycling plastic waste into paving bricks and concrete tiles for housing. As of 2020, coming to the end of that year, they won the United Nations Young Champions Earth Award. And the culmination of that was they were able to secure fast investment, and they exploded. I was seeing them on like World Economic Forum, Inc.com, all these like different platforms. And they were not only just getting media coverage for their work, you even getting people like in South America, in New Zealand, all these different people be like, hey, do you know these Kenyans who are doing this amazing thing? And I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe Nzambi has grown to this level. But it kind of caught my attention that there's a possibility that there can be one story that is told about you. Of course, it's a builder, but that story kind of like tips the scale and gets you like moving and jumping forward. And I think that inspired me with the work itself, because I knew it was 2 years of tireless, constant trying to kind of see that value. And then most importantly, it also kind of validated the belief that behavioral change communication is possible, and stories can do that for you. And it's always like a reminder for business leaders as well to just also deeply look at what they're selling. It's just not a product sometimes. You have to kind of understand it and be patient enough to kind of watch how it grows and excels, because all it takes is just one story and you make a difference.
That is indeed true. If we could somewhat figure out a way to kind of capture every single person's story via communication, that would be an ideal world, don't you think?
Yeah.
Well, in that regard, I suppose most of our listeners must be fascinated by this approach that you have, Jonathan. Is there a way they can reach out to you and bring forth any queries that they might have, of course?
Yes, definitely. I think I've shared that as well with the team. On email, I'll share my work email, so jonathan@bookbank.org, and it's book.bunk.org. They could, of course, visit the Bookbank website, which is www.bookbank.org. I'll also be sharing my LinkedIn profile just now. Yeah, that's where they can find me.
Great. Thank you for that. So I suppose we should stop all the chit chat amongst ourselves and open this up for a larger conversation. I'd like to open up the floor for any questions that our lovely, of course, listening audience might have. I can, of course, kind of take a peek at some from our audience. Let's see. We have one at play. How do we find a balance between the personal experience and the professional impact we want our story to have in corporate spaces? Jonathan?
I mean, that's a good question. I feel like we've kind of partly answered it. The balance is to always ask yourself, like, how much you're humanizing this. Something I found interesting was to always ask yourself this kind of 3-4 questions. Does it have value? Does it like build empathy? Does it create meaningful connections? And does it create impact? That's how you answer those 4 questions. Usually there are times where it might make more sense to kind of, because I get the stories that we tell and they're kind of sad stories, but it's also good to tell yourself, like, are you practicing empathy and value for the other person that you're featuring? This is mainly for kind of, if you're working in the nonprofit sector. I think we've seen before, there's certain campaigns where they've kind of gone off the mark with that, where you haven't like fully respected the other person's like personal space. So it's always good to ask yourself those 4 questions. If you're answering those 4 questions, you're within the right metrics to kind of excel at, storytelling and finding that, cute balance.
Great, thank you for that. Next, we have a query from Sonia. How can I use storytelling in my job search?
That is a very good question, because I think that applies to literally, I can see you just beaming, Ian, because this is literally the bane of your existence. So it's very important that to always like start by thinking about your role. There's a famous speech by Steve Jobs, which is kind of connecting the dots. And in that speech, he kind of explains all these different things that he did that kind of like led to him starting Apple, right? So it's always good, Sonia, for you to take time and to kind of just connect the dots of where you started and how those different skill sets have kind of like led you to where you are right now. I'll give an example. So I started with comms, but prior to comms, straight after, like when I was in high school, I had such an interest in journalism. So I spent a lot of time, like, you know, kind of setting up the school paper and running like this super fun like weekend edition that came out like every weekend at school, and people would like get to read it. And that's kind of like where I started like building my interest around that. Immediately after high school, I was interested in, you know, kind of like scaling that up. So found the opportunity to work at a local radio station and just kind of, you know, did that slow. Then of course had a gap year of figuring myself out over time, and then kind of bounced back into the job market. But you see, all those little experiences have kind of led me to where I'm at today. The ability to have this panel session, like talk like this and be kind of, you know, a presentation, you know, have a presentation as well. That comes from kind of years of all these little mini steps that sometimes you don't think mean something, but they kind of always build up. So I just spend a bit more time being reflective, look at all the different things you've done, and then begin to craft a story of the things that have led you to that. It always helps if the jobs that you're also looking for are within the kind of your areas of interest, because you find it like it's super easy to talk about, you know, what you're good at. Yeah, I think that's useful.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that, Jonathan. Moving along, there's one more as well. Where can I create the space to tell my story and my goals? I'm having a bit of difficulty right now as I'm navigating the job market, especially transitioning to a new career. Any thoughts?
It's always exciting when you're, it might not look like it, but when we transition into a kind of like a new space, one of the skills I normally tell myself that is going to be kind of the most important as we go forward is the skill to constantly learn to start over. I think one thing we've seen of the world is nothing is constant. Things keep changing, but the ability to jump from one situation and then that ends and kind of like start over again, like that ability to be able to do that is such a critical thing. So I think you're in a beautiful space. What I'd say that would make sense is find the thing that is most comfortable to you, like creatively. As I mentioned, storytelling is about like humanizing ourselves, and it's based on our identities. So for some people, it's art. They prefer to paint. For someone like me, who's obviously too wide and too chatty and all the things in between, it's journaling. I'd want to sit down and write my thoughts. And it could take different forms. It could just be you like spending a few minutes to kind of like, you know, center yourself. And then that's how you begin to craft that story, and you have to begin to like understand it. A lot of, and it might sound kind of weird, but a lot of the times, even when you're doing strategy in comms, like when you're trying to understand your audience, like this is what most likely will tick, this is what will like get people going, it's because you have to spend a lot of time being introspective and understanding, like, is there something I'm missing? And kind of like, let me look at the big picture. So once you do that, you begin to find like the points and be like, this is where I start from, this is kind of where I want to go, and this is where I want to kind of tweak and change that. Yeah. So in terms of your goals, it's good to have like the super big picture, but then to also kind of have mini goals that guide you to that. And most importantly, gratitude. Just be grateful for every single step that you're taking, because that's the only way you motivate yourself to kind of move through your goals.
Once more, thank you for that, Jonathan. We have one more that just floated in from Sarah. In a world that has become so easy to communicate and share information, how can we ensure that we are telling the right stories that make an impact?
I think this has been the struggle for journalists, especially because you learn that balance of, do I really have to share? Do I really have to like kind of do this story? And then of course you're fighting with fake news, where it's so easy to find this. And so I'm going to be honest. There are ways you can individually ensure that you tell stories, but also just know that within the space that we're in and with the weird algorithms that we have with social media, that will always be the challenge. Yeah. But one, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Always look at the 4 things. Is it meaningful? Does it exercise empathy? Does it have impact? Does it have value? As long as you're answering those 4 questions, it would always be easy for you to know, do I have to share this? Is this too personal or is this necessary? And those are the tenets that we kind of have to stick by to ensure that we're kind of, also respecting everyone in their spaces.
Yeah, that weighs in quite heavily with storytelling as an art or a tool of commercialization discussion.
Yeah.
More so, we have one more. Is an actively engaging social media, a social media handle that reflects your identity and goals, an integral part of storytelling while applying for new jobs?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, indeed.
Excuse the French. The reason I say that is because I think increasingly what we're noticing across the board is we have different like kind of partners and people, different like employers, they keep checking up and seeing like what you're up to on social media. But the other thing I'm going to say, sometimes like participating in certain conversations do help. Nowadays, like on Twitter, for example, we have different Twitter spaces. On LinkedIn, there are guys, there are people all over who are doing like different stories and kind of, or different posts that are like kind of, I want to use the word that are like thought leadership. And because of that, it makes it like super easy for people to share their work and to recommend them for things. So I'd say take a keen look at how you also post. I don't think it's good for us to kind of teach ourselves the culture of like kind of being that personal, but because of the world we live in, chances are your potential employer will be looking at like how you are engaging on social media, and that could play a role.
Yeah, and I completely concur. And of course, being in talent acquisition, yes, your profile would indeed tell you your story. So yeah, having one would certainly be vital in your journey, in your career journey as well. Great. We have one from Tebo. I think that research is incredibly important when it comes to storytelling. It ensures that your messages are tailored in such a way that they really resonate with your audience and are impactful. Thank you for that, Ntebo. Sorry, Jonathan. That was more of just Ntebo just sharing their thoughts.
And I absolutely agree with him on that.
Well, great. And now I suppose we can hop off into again segue, of course, into the end of this chat. It's been a lovely experience speaking to everyone that's on board. Jonathan, as we hop off, might you have any queries or any elements you might like to share with everyone?
Yeah, let's keep telling our stories. Let's find ways to connect and to share about our heritage and Black excellence. Once again, I'm like super happy to be in a space where we're kind of doing that. And as I mentioned, like reclaiming this colonial relic and redefining it as defining our identity as Kenyans, and I'm also thrilled to kind of find different business leaders, investors, and seeing them like actually begin to see value in communications. And equally excited for the many ways we can humanize ourselves and begin to see each other. So hoping to see tons of you reaching out on email for us to carry this conversation forward.
Great. Thank you for that. I'd like to wager as well that storytelling is an ephemeral tool. That wager quite strongly is a starting point of all impact-driven work. I would say the interrelation between diversity, equity, and inclusion and the job market bears a unique storyline, a storyline that has seen underrepresented talent shunned from the limelight for a long time. So I'm here at PowerToFly, empowering underrepresented talent across the globe lies at the very crux of our storyline. So please swing by the PowerToFly website for more information.